Jia Hao, as they say in China. So the Cubs bounced back after dropping the first two games of the divisional series to the Milwaukee Brewers. They bounced back, won the next two games in Chicago, and have evened up the series and have forced a decisive game five. I'm still not happy about there being a wild card series, but watching these last two games, I'm starting to think that maybe, and maybe this is wishful thinking on my part, but I'm starting to think that maybe the Cubs pitchers and the coaches have figured out a way to better pitch the Brewers batters, and that the Brewers are probably starting to feel a little tired at this point. I mean, they came into the first two games with like a week off, well rested. They didn't have to do a wild card series, so they had plenty of rest. But I think they might have wore themselves out in the first two games. Momentum is definitely on Chicago's side. And by the way, if you enjoy the video, like and subscribe. But anyway, momentum is on Chicago's side. And I asked Perplexity Pro for its take on my observation and its prediction for game five. And I started this thread, I think around seventh inning of game four, and then I finished it up after the game had ended. So let me just go through what it said. So after asking for an update on game four, just did that so Perplexity would have a better idea what I was talking about and how to answer me. I asked it, do you think the observation that the Cubs have figured out how to pitch the Brewers better since game two and the Brewers are starting to feel more fatigue is wishful thinking? Be completely objective. And I'm just going to call it PP for now on. That's a little silly, but Perplexity Pro is a little hard to say. So PP said, objectively, evaluating the observation that the Cubs have figured out how to pitch the Brewers better since game two and that the Brewers are showing signs of fatigue, the evidence is mixed, but leans toward it being more plausible rather than wishful thinking. Regarding the Cubs' pitching improvement, the Brewers used a bullpen game in game two. Did they? I didn't even realize that, indicating they were trying different strategies. The Cubs forced a must-win Game 3 victory at Wrigley Field. What? I haven't read this whole thing yet. The Cubs forced a must-game win 3 victory at Wrigley Field, showing some level of success against Milwaukee pitching adjustments. That sentence doesn't really make any sense. I should just say the Cubs won a must-win, or the Cubs were victorious in a must-win Game 3. It goes on to say, Game 4 starter Matthew Boyd has been solid this season despite a heavy workload, except for like Game 1 of this series, which could help Chicago compete effectively against Milwaukee. It's a response. It was a little confused in its response, but anyway, it says, on the Brewers' fatigue side, their bullpen has been effective and relatively rested, with key relievers still available for high leverage innings in game four. So it's like respond to me as if like game four hasn't even started. Okay. Uh, but let's jump to the summary. The Cubs appearing to have adapted better pitching strategies since game two is supported by their victory. I'm guessing that means in game three and continued competitiveness. However, the Brewers do not yet show overt signs of fatigue in their pitching staff due to effective workload management. The idea of Brewers fatigue is plausible but should be viewed cautiously, as their pitching staff remains relatively prepared to close out the series. And I said, which is what I actually meant, I said, what about the Brewers position players being more fatigued? Likely wishful thinking. And PP says, the likelihood that the Brewers position players are fatigued in this NLDS series is plausible, but not definitive based on available evidence. Okay, I'm not sure it understood I was asking about them being fatigued since game two, like after game two, but it says the Brewers offense gradually improved over the regular season, overcoming injuries and slow starts by key players like Christian Yelich and Willem Contreras. This actually says William. Is it William or Willem? Maybe it is William. I'm thinking anyway. Despite a strong offensive surge mid-season, the team has scored fewer runs late in the season and during the postseason, raising questions about. Okay, that's not really true. They scored a ton of runs in the first game of the postseason, raising questions about whether some players, yeah, definitely didn't understand. I was talking just about the last two games. But in summary, while Brewers position players fatigue is possible given scoring dips and lineup adjustments, it is not firmly established and could also be part of a normal late season, blah, blah, blah. But wait till later after the game is over when I ask it this question again. Okay, and I say, if the Cubs hang on, what is your prediction for game five? And PP says, if the Cubs hang on to win game four and force a decisive game five, the prediction generally favors the Brewers to win and advance to the NLCS, though the matchup remains competitive. For game five, the Brewers would likely have Freddie Peralta on the mound again. And okay, that really didn't make sense to me. And I'm going to get to that in a second. It's probably a better way to put that, but that's all I can think of. Pitching on short rest, as he has been their ace with a strong regular season and playoff performance. Again, this response was made, I think, before the end of the game, but I think it was after Peralta exited the game, but maybe he just didn't have like access to all that information. But he says the Cubs would probably turn to Matthew Boyd again. No, that's not going to happen. Okay. And I kind of call it PP on this. I didn't even read this part. They're not gonna, the Cubs aren't going to have Boyd throw again in game five. But it says, in summary, the prediction for game five leans towards the Brewers winning on the strength of pitching depth and home advantage, but the Cubs are a formidable underdog with momentum from winning game four. It's a little confusing. I'm pretty sure, I don't know. I guess I don't think this response came after the game was over, but maybe it did. Yeah, actually, I think, no, no, no. I definitely asked this question before the game was over. Okay, so then, yeah, I wasn't even sure if Peralta was the starter for game four. I was pretty sure he was. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with other teams' staffs other than the Cubs. And even the Cubs, I'm not watching their games like I used to. But I was pretty sure Peralta was the guy that started game four. Yeah, he was. They said he started game four. And then I said, you really think he'll pitch in game five? And so I guess maybe PP wasn't the best one to ask this, but this is the only one I have like a premium account with. But PP says it is plausible that Freddie Peralta will pitch in game five. No, it's not. But it depends on several factors. No, it doesn't. He pitched in game one and again tonight in game four, meaning he would be on short rest for a potential game five just 2 days after his last outing. Starting pitchers typically have 4 days rest, so this would be an abbreviated recovery period. Peralta is the Brewers' ace and has, yeah, I'm sure that's true, but he's not pitching in game five. And has been the best pitcher in the series. Not really, if you look at what he did today. So the team may opt to push him on short rest to maximize their chance of closing on the series at home. I mean, I guess Peralta was pretty good after the first inning, but still, he did give up a 3-run home run. However, this carries the risk of decreased performance or injury. I tell you, I really, really hope Peralta starts game five, but that's not going to happen. Reports and analysis suggest that the Brewers are leaning toward using Peralta on short rest for Game 5 if necessary, showing confidence in his endurance and importance to their rotation in this high-stakes moment. In summary, while it is not ideal, not even close, it is likely the Brewers will have Peralta start Game 5. No, it's not. I basically asked this question. Well, I asked, I mean, I remember watching a video last night. I'm in Vietnam, by the way, in case you didn't see my last video. So, I watched the game. For me, it was this morning. And by the way, I watched it with a free account through Vivix. I, I mean, like a free 7-day trial, which is what I did for the wild card series, but I did that with MLB TV. And thing about Vivix, it's like a Hispanic streaming platform. So the game was like all in Spanish, but then like halfway through the game, I got the idea of maybe trying to find like just the audio, the English audio for the game on YouTube, and I was able to do that. So I just lowered the volume on the Vivix video and then played the audio from YouTube. So that's like if you don't have access to the game, that's like a good thing to try. Again, I'm having a brain fart on a good words to describe that. A good option is what I probably should say. By the way, to get like a free trial for the postseason with MLB TV, I think you wouldn't be able to do that through their website, but you can do it if you have like Prime, Amazon Prime. So you'd only be able to do that with Amazon Prime. But anyway, I next asked PP, what is the maximum pitches you think he would be allowed? And PP says, he reached around 85 pitches in game four. They're usually limited to around 100 pitches per start. And he's saying you could possibly throw around 70, 80 pitches. Now, I was expecting PP to say maybe like at the most 20 pitches, but yeah, again, I guess PP obviously is not an expert on baseball or you know, all the facets to the game of baseball. But I did think it would know you don't freaking start the same pitcher 2 games in a row. But anyway, so he says in summary, Freddie Peralta's maximum pitch count for game five on short rest would likely be around 70 to 80 pitches to balance effectiveness and safety, rather than the typical 100 pitch limit for regular season rest. And I actually said to him, I think you're off your rocker if you think Peralta will be able to throw 70 pitches 2 days after throwing 85 pitches. And PP says your skepticism is understandable and well founded. Yes, definitely. Pitching 70 or more pitches just 2 days after throwing 85 pitches is indeed a significant workload, especially in a high intensity playoff setting. In MLB, starting pitchers typically have 4 days of rest between starts to allow recovery, and throwing close to 70 pitches on only 2 days rest is unusual and risky. Yeah, I know. I think there's like precedent for maybe taking 3 days rest. I think that's what the Cleveland pitchers did in the World Series in 2016 against the Cubs, and I think Lester came in and on like what he started game yeah he started game five, and then so he had one two three, so yeah, when he came in game seven it was like a 3 days rest, but he didn't even start that game. So for PP to think that Peralta is going to start game five on 2 days rest is just completely absurd. But he says it's more likely. Oh, what? It's more likely. I didn't see that if. It says it's more likely that if Peralta starts game five on such short rest, the Brewers would monitor his pitch count very strictly. Yeah, he's not starting game five. And so I even asked it. I was like, I don't, when it said that to me, I was like, I don't think that's ever been done. Or I can't remember that ever being done, having a pitcher start 2 games in a row or even appear in 2 games in a well, I think maybe, what's his name? Madison Bumgarner might have done 2 games in a row. There might have been some other pitcher, maybe the Rocket, who was, pretty buff. But anyway, so I asked you, when was the last time a pitcher started 2 games in a row in the postseason? And again with Baumgartner, I'm sure he never started 2 games in a row in his life, but he might have like appeared in 2 games in a row. But PP basically says he can't find any precedent for that. Um, and so I say to to PP, then what makes you think it's so plausible he will start game five? And PP says the notion that Freddie Peralta would start game five after pitching game four, starting game four just 2 days earlier, is indeed unconventional and not common practice in modern MLB postseason strategy. And again, he says they typically have 3 to 4 days rest, but he tries to defend his position, tries to stick to his position, says the plausibility comes mainly from the situation's urgency and the importance of game five being winner take all contest, possibly prompting the Brewers to consider pushing their ace on short rest despite the risk. No, that's not going to happen. Oh, and yeah, I mean, when I say pitchers, I should have the caveat when I say pitchers don't appear in 2 games in a row. I mean, starting pitchers, I know like relievers and closers will do 2 games in a row often, especially in the postseason, but there's not much. Yeah, I've never seen pitchers start 2 games in a row, postseason or regular season. But he's like kind of sticking to his guns. Says teams sometimes deviate from normal rest patterns. Yeah, I know that's true, but not to this extent. And it says, however, from a sports medicine and traditional managerial perspective, it is unlikely Peralta would be expected or allowed to throw a typical starts workload or go deep into the game. The Brewers would likely have a strict pitch limit or use him in a limited role early before turning to the bullpen. Now, I think it might be possible, might, if they really have their back against the wall, he might come in for like an inning of relief. That's it. And I say again, and you actually think he'll be effective and that the Brewers are a favorite if Peralta starts game five? And PP says, if Freddie Peralta starts game five on short rest, his effectiveness would likely be diminished compared to a normal rest start. Down here he says, however, the margin for error. Wait, let's read this. That said, Peralta's experience and skill could still make him a valuable asset in Game 5, especially if the Brewers' bullpen is strong and ready to support him early. Brewers would still be considered favorites if Peralta starts. No, they wouldn't, because of his status as their best pitcher, combined with the team's overall depth, home field advantage, and offensive capabilities. However, the margin for error narrows significantly. The Cubs may feel encouraged to be more aggressive at the plate if they detect signs of. Yeah, he's not starting Game 5. He's like so. And I bring up to PP, he wasn't even very effective today. You're telling me you believe he would be more effective with less rest? And PP says, given that Freddie Peralta was not very effective in Game 4 today, it is indeed unlikely he would perform better or even with even less rest in Game 5. Pitching on short rest generally exacerbates fatigue and decreases effectiveness, so expecting an improved performance under those conditions would be unrealistic. No kidding. If Peralta struggled today, the Brewers would face a tough decision about whether to start. They're not starting him. So objectively, it is improbable that Peralta would be more effective. So yeah, they're not starting him. I think what's his name? Peterson, Perkins. What's the Brewers manager? I think he knows this. He's not starting Peralta. Okay, so now this is after the game. I say game four is over now, and the Cubs won. Take another shot at analyzing the game and series based on new reports since the win, and let me know if your prediction is unchanged. And PP says, after the Cubs' commanding 6-0 win over the Brewers in Game 4, the series will indeed come down to a decisive Game 5 back in Milwaukee. The Cubs forced the extra game by dominating on both offense and pitching. Matthew Boyd redeemed his earlier poor outing with a strong start, going 4 2/3. Yeah, Matthew Boyd was freaking awesome today. He went 4 2/3 scoreless innings and 6 strikeouts, backed by a solid bullpen effort. Ian Happ, Kyle Tucker, and Michael Busch all homered. continuing the Cubs' trend of early scoring and clutch hitting. The Brewers were held to just 3 hits and struggled with runners in scoring position, leaving 13 men on base in the 2 games at Wrigley. The series has featured an unusual dominance by the home team, with each of the 4 games won by the hosting squad. Given this new context, the outlook for Game 5 changes somewhat. The Brewers still have the edge with home field advantage and a deeper pitching staff, but Peralta's effectiveness is now more questionable after his struggles and the short rest scenario. The Cubs ride momentum and confidence after consecutive wins forcing the series finale. My prior prediction that the Brewers are slight favorites still holds generally true due to pitching depth and home advantage, but the margin is narrower and Game 5 looks much more of a toss-up now. The Cubs' resilience and momentum give them a strong chance to pull off the upset if they can continue their early scoring and timely hitting while pressuring the Brewers' pitching. In summary, the Cubs' win has tightened the series considerably. Game 5 is poised to be a highly competitive, close contest where both teams have a viable shot, and the Cubs' chances have improved notably with their Game 4 performance. And I have to say, I actually think the Cubs are slight favorites at this point. And then I asked PP, does my theory about Cubs pitching and Brewers fatigue seem any more plausible to you now? And PP says, yes, your theory about the Cubs pitching improving against the Brewers and the Brewers showing signs of fatigue appears more plausible now based on the recent developments. The Cubs pitching staff, led by Matthew Boyd's strong Game 4 performance and backed by the bullpen's effectiveness, showed clear adjustments and improvement from earlier games. Holding the Brewers to 3 hits and shutting them out highlights the Cubs' ability to better navigate Milwaukee's lineup. Regarding fatigue, the Brewers hitters repeatedly left stranded on base and seemed unable to capitalize on scoring opportunities in Game 3 and 4. This pattern, combined with multiple long innings, yeah, how about that inning where Brewers had men at second and third? Was it just 1 out? Yeah, and they couldn't push a run across. But anyway, continuing. This pattern, combined with multiple long innings pitched by their starters and bullpen, suggests the psychological and physical wear may be impacting their execution and consistency. In short, the Cubs adapting better to Milwaukee's pitching while the Brewers' offense signs, fatigue signs, makes your theory credible as the series heads into a winner-take-all Game 5. The Cubs are currently leading the Brewers 5-0. I don't know what happened here. I mean, I said earlier, and he even acknowledged earlier that game was over. So I didn't even read this part until just now. But okay. So then I say, assuming the Brewers don't use Peralta on 2 days rest, it's kind of sarcastic on my part, but I'm sure PP didn't pick that up. I say, what are their other pitching options? And PP says, if the Brewers decide not to use Freddie Peralta on just 2 days rest for Game 5, their most likely option is to turn to Aaron Ashby as the starter. Ashby is a left-handed pitcher who has pitched well this season and would be on regular rest from Game 5. Yet I don't think the Cubs have hit left-handers very well this postseason or during the regular season, so that's a little worrisome. Given Peralta's recent struggle and effectiveness concerns on short rest, Ashby provides a viable alternative to start the decisive game. Other plausible options include a bullpen game approach, leveraging several relievers who remain relatively rested due to off days earlier in the series. I wonder how many pitchers they have that didn't appear in the last 2 games, games 3 and 4. The Brewers bullpen has been effective with pitchers like Jose Quintana, who threw 3 innings in Game 3, former Cub Jose Quintana. I didn't even know he was with the Brewers now. I didn't even know he was still playing. He's getting up there. Grant Anderson, Jared Koenig, and Chad Patrick available to cover innings. The bullpen heavy plan might be more likely if the Brewers want to protect their starters' arms and maximize matchups. I'm guessing protect their arms for the NLCS. However, starting Ashby on regular rest is generally seen as the best balanced choice if Peralta is not available for Game 5. Overall, the Brewers' options without Peralta on short rest boil down to either Ashby as starter or a bullpen game utilizing the deep and rested relief corps. And I think this was like the last question. Can you tell me the number of pitches each pitcher threw for each team of the last 2 games? And it isn't really able to answer me completely, but it says that in Game 3, the Brewers pitchers threw a total of 161 pitches, with 49 of those coming from Quintana. Doesn't say Priester, doesn't tell me. I wanted to tell me like each pitcher that appeared and how many pitchers each pitcher threw. I don't know if it misunderstood me or just didn't have access to all that information. It says the Cubs threw 153 pitches, so that's pretty close, a little less, but Jameson Taillon left early due to pitching struggles. Thought he did really good. Yeah, I was only able to watch like I think it's the middle 5 innings of Game 3. Bullpen threw the rest to complete the game, but from what I understood, Jameson Taillon kicked ass in Game 3. Game 4 doesn't even have the total by the Cubs or the Brewers. Just says Palencia threw 18, Boyd threw 74, uh, Pomerantz, Keller, Kittredge combined for the remaining innings. Pitch counts per reliever not fully specified. Okay, these counts reflect the workload on both pitching staffs, indicating the Brewers starters and bullpen have been heavily utilized, which informs considerations of fatigue and strategy heading into Game 5. Here are the pitch counts. Okay, it answers the question again for some reason. I think it just gives the same answers. Yeah. Yeah, so that was my last question. So, Perplexity Pro thinks it's going to be a good game on Saturday. It believes the Brewers are slight favorites. I tend to disagree. I really wish the Phillies would have forced a Game 5 with the Dodgers, but whoever wins this, whoever wins on Saturday, goes on to face the Los Angeles Dodgers, and that's going to be tough for whichever team that is. But anyway, that's about it for the video. Hope you liked it. Um, Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you to all my subscribers. Thanks for watching. Who do you think will win Game 5? Who do you think will start Game 5? I don't know, maybe it's been announced already, but anyway, I think that's it for this video. It's been kind of long, so I'm going to end it here. Go Cubs!